we look back at the 1961 photographs, John F. Kennedy is the very image of vitality. He is young, wears a smile that disarms any camera, and has Jackie by his side, who has transformed the White House into a stage of global glamour. To millions of people, JFK is the symbol of a new era, the American Camelot, a promise of a future that seems capable of touching the stars. But if we could pierce through the celluloid of those images, we would find a broken man. Kennedy's biological reality was a silent and agonizing struggle. He suffered from Addison's disease, an endocrine disorder that, at the time, kept him on the brink of the abyss. This was no minor weakness. It was a sentence that required a daily cocktail of 8 drugs, administered by a medical team obsessed with discretion. Powerful stimulants to endure his days, opioid painkillers to combat the pain eating away at his spine, anti-anxiety medication, barbiturates to force a sleep that rarely came, and hormones to keep his metabolism functioning. He had received the last rites 5 times in his life. The man who projected unstoppable strength needed chemical help just to stand each morning. However, his true pains did not come from his body, but from the halls of Washington. Kennedy had entered the White House with a vision that deeply disturbed the architects of the system. After the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, an operation orchestrated by the CIA that ended in an international humiliation, the relationship between the president and the intelligence agency was broken forever. Kennedy, seeing that the agency was operating with its own agenda, independent of the commander-in-chief's wishes, uttered a phrase that the hardliners of intelligence would never forget. "I will splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter them to the winds." It wasn't just the CIA. Kennedy questioned the need for a massive presence in Vietnam and sought to de-escalate nuclear tension with the Soviet Union, something unacceptable to the hawks of the military-industrial complex, who saw the Cold War as an inexhaustible business. In a speech that today reads like an omen, Kennedy warned of the existence of a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relied on covert means to expand its influence. While JFK fought these shadows, fate pushed him toward Dallas. It was not a neutral choice. In 1963, Dallas was the heart of political extremism. Days before his arrival, the city was plastered with leaflets showing his face under the headline "Wanted for Treason." Kennedy was aware of the hostility. He knew he was entering enemy territory. But, in his usual style, he refused to cancel the trip. The man who medicated himself just to stand and who challenged the masters of global intelligence boarded that plane with the certainty that his presidency was a chess game where he was playing against those who, under the guise of protecting the country, were willing to destroy anyone who dared to change the rules of the game. He did not know that, as he landed in Texas, the board was already set for his final move to be his last. On November 22, 1963, Dallas wakes up under an almost unreal blue sky. The temperature is pleasant, which leads the president to make a technical decision that will change history, ordering the plastic covers to be removed from the Lincoln Continental convertible. Kennedy wants eye contact with the people. He wants them to see him. At 11:40 a.m., Air Force One lands at Love Field. The presidential motorcade is greeted by an enthusiastic crowd. Among them, a man named Lee Harvey Oswald, though no one seems to pay him any attention at the time. At 11:55 a.m., the motorcade begins its march toward the Trade Mart, where Kennedy was to have lunch. Here is where the details matter. The original itinerary did not include passing through Dealey Plaza, but the route was altered. To reach the highway, the presidential car must make a slow, forced 120-degree turn from Main Street onto Elm Street, passing directly in front of the Texas School Book Depository. It is a technical curve that forces the limousine to reduce speed to about 15 kilometers per hour, 9 miles per hour, turning it into an almost static target. At 12:30 p.m., the Lincoln enters the plaza. The atmosphere is joyous. Governor John Connally, who is riding in the front seat next to his wife Nellie, remembers hearing a sharp sound. "It wasn't firecrackers," he would later say. "It was the first shot." Kennedy clutches his throat. The bullet, according to ballistics reconstruction, passes through his neck and strikes Governor Connally, impacting his chest, wrist, and thigh. The car does not accelerate immediately. The Secret Service, trained to protect against frontal threats, is overwhelmed by the confusion. 5 seconds later, the second shot, the fatal one, strikes Kennedy in the upper right side of the head. The force of the impact is devastating. The skull is shattered and the president slumps onto the back seat, while Jackie, in a state of catatonic shock, tries to reach for fragments of bone and tissue on the trunk of the vehicle. It is only a few seconds, but the physics of the horror are absolute. The driver, Roy Kellerman, finally reacts and floors the accelerator. The Lincoln lunges at a suicidal speed down the highway toward Parkland Hospital. On board, the scene is macabre: blood, tissue fragments, and the scream of a first lady who has just watched her world disintegrate. As the car disappears into the distance, in the window of the 6th floor of the book depository, only silence and an abandoned Mannlicher Carcano rifle remain. At 1 p.m., in the Parkland emergency room, doctors declare John F. Kennedy dead. The most powerful man in the world has ceased to exist, but the state machine, cold and calculating, is already setting in motion the narrative that, for decades, we would attempt to decipher. If the assassination was an act of violence, the subsequent investigation was an act of disorientation. It all begins at Bethesda Hospital, in Maryland, where Kennedy's body was moved for a military autopsy that, from the very first minute, was marked by an atmosphere of intimidation. The doctors in Dallas, the first to treat the president, had clearly described an entrance wound in the front of the head, in the temple, which technically suggested a frontal shot. But at Bethesda, that narrative was dismantled. Intelligence agents and military personnel guarded the room, dictating what could be recorded and what should be omitted. The military pathologists, under stifling pressure, ended up concluding what the powers that be needed to hear, that the shots came exclusively from behind, from the window of the book depository. The president's brain, a piece of critical evidence to determine the exact trajectory of the fatal shot, simply disappeared in the following months. For any criminal investigator, losing the brain of a murder victim is equivalent to erasing the crime scene, and in this case, the loss was too convenient to be accidental. Then there is the weapon, the Mannlicher Carcano, an Italian bolt-action rifle from World War II, described by many experts as a toy due to its lack of precision and slow loading speed. The official version rests on the theory of the single bullet, the famous magic bullet. A single projectile that allegedly pierced Kennedy's neck and Governor Connolly's body, causing a total of 7 wounds. Physically, this implies that the bullet maintained a curved trajectory, dodging bones and tissue in an impossible way, and exited practically intact, as if it hadn't hit anything. It is here that forensic science collides head-on with the official history. The trajectory, the integrity of the projectile, and the time required to fire the shots, barely 6 seconds, were the pillars the Warren Commission used to support the lone wolf theory. However, decades of modern ballistic analysis have shown that, under the laws of physics, it is extremely difficult for a single bullet to cause such damage with such precision. The information straw surrounding this evidence, with hundreds of documents on irrelevant details of Oswald's life, served for years to hide an uncomfortable truth, that the physical evidence was manipulated or, at least, filtered to fit a prefabricated narrative. We are not just talking about a negligent investigation. We are talking about a system that, faced with the possibility of a plot, decided it was safer to blame a single man, even if they had to rewrite the laws of ballistics to do so. 90 minutes after the assassination, Dallas police locate Lee Harvey Oswald in a movie theater, the Texas Theater. The arrest is frantic. Oswald, a former Marine who had defected to the Soviet Union and possessed a history of erratic movements, is pulled from the theater surrounded by agents. As they take him to the station, his shout cuts through the cameras, "I didn't shoot anyone. I'm a patsy." That phrase is not just a defense, it is a challenge to the system. If Oswald was really the perpetrator, why did he insist so much that he was being manipulated? The Dallas police, under suffocating pressure, interrogate him for hours, but no complete recording of those interrogations exists. What we do know is that Oswald was a man who knew too many secrets of the intelligence services. But Oswald's time runs out on November 24th. At 11:21 a.m., while the nation watches the transfer of Oswald from the police station to the county jail live, the unthinkable happens. A man pushes through the crowd of police and reporters. Jack Ruby. He is a man with a dark past, owner of a strip club in Dallas, with close ties to both the local underworld and, according to later investigations, contacts within the Dallas police force. Ruby approaches Oswald within inches and, with the coldness of an executioner, fires. The image is chaos in black and white. Police shouting, Oswald's body collapsing, the national television audience in shock. With that single shot, the second magnicide is consummated. Jack Ruby doesn't just kill a suspect. He kills the possibility of a trial. Oswald's death means there will be no cross-examination. We will never know what he knew about the CIA's movements, nor who his real contacts were in Mexico or the USSR. The truth is buried in that concrete basement. Later official explanations described Ruby as a patriotic citizen, someone who, overcome by grief after Kennedy's death, decided to take justice into his own hands. But for any analyst, the question remains, floating in the air. How was it possible that a civilian with a criminal record and mafia ties obtained such easy access to a high-security police area at the exact moment the most guarded man in the world was coming out? Oswald's death was not an act of impulsivity. It was a strategic move to silence a key witness. That day, in Dallas, history was rewritten at gunpoint. If we traverse the labyrinth of what happened that November 22nd, the conclusion is only one. The assassination of John F. Kennedy was not an endpoint. It was a turning point that fractured the trust between the citizen and the state in a way that, 60 years later, has yet to heal. The change was immediate. Just hours after the assassination, while Kennedy's body was still being moved, the war machine he was trying to contain began to turn in the opposite direction. The withdrawal from Vietnam, a decision Kennedy had seriously discussed, was discarded under the new administration of Lyndon B. Johnson. The war escalation was total, and the military-industrial complex, the very thing Kennedy feared so much, found in his absence the open path to transform the Cold War into a permanent, global business. For decades, we have been promised the truth through the massive declassification of files. However, what we have received is a tactic of distraction. Millions of pages of bureaucracy, irrelevant notes, and documents on the private lives of informants that only serve to hide the few dozen pages that actually contain the answers. It is the art of blinding the public with an excess of information, a documentary of straw, designed so that any attempt to reach the truth ends up exhausted in a national archive. The question that resonates today is not just who pulled the trigger, But why such a monumental effort was made to silence the investigation? Was it fear of a nuclear war? The protection of covert operations that would have brought down the government? Or perhaps, the bitter realization that, when the interests of power reach a peak, institutions are not there to protect the citizen, but to protect themselves. 60 years later, the Kennedy case is not a closed file. It is the black hole of modern history. It remains open in the collective memory because it reminds us that, in the game of the great spheres, the truth is often the first collateral damage. That day in Dallas, not only was a president lost, the innocence of a nation was lost, and the faith in a system that, since then, has lived under perpetual suspicion. The file rests today under layers of secrecy, but history, the one written by facts and not by official reports, continues to wait for the day when the light finally reaches what actually happened in the shadows of Dealey Plaza. But while that light arrives, we are left with the duty of not letting the silence win. History is not a closed book. It is a witness we must continue to interrogate. Now, the investigation is in your hands. What part of this puzzle unsettles you the most? Do you believe we are facing a conspiracy protected from the highest levels? Or that, simply, the truth has diluted with the passage of time? I'll read your thoughts in the comments, because collective memory is, sometimes, the only justice we have left. If this analysis has given you a new perspective on what really happened that day, I invite you to subscribe and share this video. Not just to support the space, but to keep the demand for answers alive. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the heart of suspicion. See you in the next installment, where we will return to open the files that others preferred to keep closed. I am John Crimes. Until the next video.